Hi, my name is Madison, and I'm 28 years old. I'm a civil engineer, I own my own home, and I've built my entire life from the ground up, not because anyone helped me, but because I had to. You see, I come from a family where love was earned, not given, and no matter how hard I tried, I was never good enough. From the outside, people thought we were a picture-perfect household, smiling family portraits, polished holiday dinners, and a clean, beautiful home in a suburban neighborhood. But inside that house, I was just a shadow, standing quietly in the background while my younger brother Jake was treated like royalty. He was the golden child, confident, charming, naturally likable. He could forget to take out the trash and still get rewarded with ice cream. I could bring home an award, and my mother Barbara would barely look up from her phone. My father Charles? He always said, "Why can't you be more like Jake?" That sentence is probably tattooed on my soul. So I stopped trying to impress them. I stopped waiting for hugs or praise or birthday surprises. I focused on what I could control: my grades, my goals, my future. I told myself that one day I would build a life so solid, so untouchable, that their approval wouldn't matter anymore. But life has a cruel way of testing the strength of what we build. I was slapped in the face, literally, on the happiest day of my brother's life. I was humiliated, not because I did something wrong, but because I refused to be stepped on again. That moment, painful as it was, became the spark that changed everything. This is not just a story about a broken family. It's about a woman who spent her life being invisible until she decided to fight back. And, believe me, what happened next, no one saw coming. I think I was about 6 years old when I first realized that love in my family came with conditions, and I didn't meet them. Jake was 4 years younger than me, but even back then, it was clear that he owned the spotlight. When he learned to tie his shoes, Barbara acted like he'd just solved world hunger. "You're so smart, Jake," she squealed, while taking pictures and calling our neighbors. When I built a model bridge out of popsicle sticks for a school project that actually supported weight, I got a glance and a tired, "That's nice, Madison," before she returned to talking about Jake's spelling bee. It wasn't just praise, it was space, time, attention. Jake's trophies were displayed front and center in the living room, gold-framed, polished, lit with accent lighting. My science fair medals? Stuffed in a box in the hallway closet. His birthdays were full-blown events with balloons, banners, and bounce houses. Mine? A store-bought cake and a family dinner that usually ended in awkward silence. But the worst part? They made me feel like it was my fault for noticing. "Stop being so jealous of your brother," Charles would say, when I quietly mentioned how unfair things felt. "You're too sensitive," Barbara would add, rolling her eyes like my hurt was annoying rather than valid. So, I stopped complaining. I buried everything. Instead, I started building my identity in places they couldn't touch: in academics, in libraries, in late nights filled with equations and design blueprints. I learned that, if I was going to have value in this world, I had to create it myself. And I did. By the time I was in high school, I was tutoring college-level math to earn extra money. I never went to prom, never joined clubs, I just worked. I applied to scholarships in secret, researched universities on my own, and planned every step of my future like a blueprint. Jake, on the other hand, coasted through life like everything was already set for him. When he failed a class, our parents blamed the teacher. When I got a 97%, they asked why it wasn't 100. The message was clear: no matter how hard I tried, it would never be enough. Unless I made myself so unshakably successful that they couldn't ignore me anymore. I didn't want their love anymore. I wanted my own freedom. Getting into college felt like stepping out of a cage. I still remember the day I loaded my bags into the back of a borrowed car and stood in the driveway waiting for someone to say something meaningful. Charles gave me a distracted nod. Barbara, without looking up, said, "Don't waste too much time on books. Remember, you'll need to settle down soon." That was it. No hugs. No pride. No tears. But I didn't cry either. I was too busy breathing in the feeling of freedom. At university, I was finally seen, not as someone's awkward daughter, not as Jake's boring sister, but as Madison, the girl who knew her way around concrete mixtures, bridge designs, and 3D rendering software. My professors respected me. My classmates listened to me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I threw myself into civil engineering like it was a lifeline. While others went to parties or took beach trips, I spent weekends in labs, on construction sites, or buried in textbooks. I picked up internships, joined fieldwork crews, and saved every dollar from part-time tutoring. I had one goal in mind: to build something that was mine. By the time I graduated, I already had a job offer waiting, not glamorous, but steady. And it paid well enough. I rented a small studio apartment, lived frugally, and saved like my life depended on it. No fancy clothes, no impulsive vacations, no luxury. Just spreadsheets, goals, and discipline. And then it happened. At 27, after years of sacrificing every comfort, I signed the papers and became the sole owner of a beautiful $550,000 two-bedroom house in a peaceful neighborhood. It wasn't massive, but it was mine. It had a clean-lined kitchen, warm hardwood floors, and a small backyard garden where I imagined reading on sunny days. Every tile, every window, every inch of that home was built by me, not with hammers and nails, but with grit and quiet perseverance. I thought, maybe, just maybe, when I told my parents, they'd be proud. They weren't. Barbara shrugged and started talking about how Jake and his girlfriend were planning their wedding. Charles asked, "Isn't that a big house for one person?" That was the moment I knew. I didn't build this life to impress them. I built it to protect myself from them. A few months after I moved into my new home, I got the invitation. Jake and Ashley were getting married, and of course, the entire event was being orchestrated by Barbara as if it were a royal affair. Custom calligraphy on gold-edged stationery, RSVP cards, engagement photos shot at some luxury vineyard. The whole thing screamed, "Look at our perfect son and his perfect life." I wasn't surprised. Jake had always been the star of the family, and his wedding was their grand production. But still, I decided to go. Part of me wanted to prove to myself that I had moved past it all. That I could show up, hold my head high, and just be neutral. Supportive even. Not for them, for myself. I didn't expect anything from them anymore, and that made me feel safe, or so I thought. The venue was stunning. A high-ceilinged banquet hall dressed in soft ivory and gold, with chandeliers that looked like falling stars and walls of glass that opened into a garden blooming with white roses. Guests sipped champagne and laughed in clusters, dressed in soft pastels and polished shoes. There were photographers, musicians, and even a string quartet. And there I was, standing alone near the refreshment table in a navy blue dress I'd bought months ago, hoping someday I'd have a reason to wear it. Barbara floated through the crowd like she owned the place, smiling and gesturing as if she were the one getting married. Charles stood close to her, shoulders back, nodding proudly at guests and basking in borrowed glory. I kept my distance, offering polite nods and weak smiles when someone recognized me. Ashley looked genuinely beautiful, delicate lace, soft makeup, a long satin veil trailing behind her. I didn't hate her. I didn't feel jealous. If anything, I felt empty, detached. And yet, there was tension in the air. I noticed it in the way Barbara's eyes would occasionally find me from across the room. Not warm, not maternal. Calculating. I didn't know it then, but I was being watched. Me showing up meant something to them, something I hadn't understood yet. I was just starting to relax when Charles walked toward me with that signature tight smile. Barbara was at his side, linking arms like they were about to offer a toast. But they weren't carrying champagne. They were carrying a trap. "Madison, dear," Barbara said, her tone coated in artificial sweetness, "can we have a quick word?" I followed them a few steps away from the main crowd, toward a quiet corner near the side hallway. The music faded behind us, replaced by the muffled chatter of guests. Charles clasped his hands behind his back like he was about to deliver a formal speech, and Barbara gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is such a special day for Jake and Ashley," she began, glancing around to make sure no one was eavesdropping. "Everything has been so perfect, and we'd really love to keep it that way." I frowned slightly, unsure where this was going. "Okay?" Charles cleared his throat. We've been thinking about their future, starting a family, stability, all of that. And, well, you have that beautiful house. I blinked. What about it? Barbara stepped forward, her voice suddenly warm but firm. You're single, Madison. You don't really need all that space. But Jake and Ashley? They're about to start a life together. It would mean so much if you gave them your house. As a wedding gift. My stomach twisted. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. But the earnest expressions on their faces told me they were absolutely serious. You want me to give them my house? Asked, my voice flat. It's not like you'll be alone forever, Charles added. You'll find a place that suits your needs. I stared at them, trying to process the insanity of what they were asking. My mind flashed back to the late nights I spent working overtime, the skipped vacations, the penny-pinching grocery trips, all to save enough for that house. I had built that life inch by inch, all on my own. No, I said, my voice steady firm. That's not going to happen. Barbara's smile dropped instantly. Don't be selfish, Madison. Family helps family. No, I repeated. Family doesn't demand sacrifices. And this isn't helping. This is theft disguised as tradition. Charles's jaw tensed. His eyes narrowed in a way that made my chest tighten. He wasn't angry that I said no. He was furious that I had the power to say it. I'm not signing over anything, I said calmly. Not now, not ever. And just like that, the temperature in the room dropped. The beautiful wedding, the sweet music, the champagne and fairy lights, all of it faded into background noise. Something was about to snap. Charles didn't say a word. He simply raised his hand, fast, without warning, and slapped me across the face. Hard. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. For a second, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My face burned, my ear rang, and my eyes watered from the sheer sting of it. It wasn't just the pain. It was the humiliation, the disbelief, the silence that followed, as every nearby conversation screeched to a halt. Glasses stopped clinking. Forks paused midair. Guests turned, one by one, their faces twisted in shock. Barbara stepped forward, eyes blazing. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed. How dare you embarrass us like this, on Jake's wedding day? I blinked rapidly, trying to stay upright. My legs felt like jelly, my heart thundered in my chest, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I touched my cheek where his hand had struck me and looked up at them, and in that moment, I saw them for exactly what they were. Bullies. Abusers. Cowards. Hey, someone shouted. What the hell was that? It was Kevin, a guest I barely knew. He stepped toward us, phone already in his hand, camera rolling. I'm calling the police, he said firmly, his fingers tapping the screen. You just assaulted her in front of 100 people. Charles turned toward him, his face flushed red. Stay out of this. But Kevin didn't back down. They're on their way. Other guests began murmuring, filming, whispering. Some walked toward me. Others pulled Jake and Ashley aside, asking what had just happened. I noticed Ashley frozen near the altar, eyes wide, completely horrified. Jake stood still, arms stiff at his sides, jaw locked. He didn't say a word. The damage had already been done. Within minutes, sirens blared in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed through the glass walls. 2 police officers entered the venue with firm steps and professional calm. Paramedics followed. Who called this in? One of the officers asked. I did, Kevin replied, stepping forward, phone still recording. He slapped her. Unprovoked. In public. We all saw it. The officer turned to me gently. Ma'am, are you injured? Do you need medical attention? I'm okay, I said quietly. I just want to file a report. They nodded. Then the officer turned to Charles. Sir, you are under arrest for assault. Charles opened his mouth to object, but Barbara lunged forward, shouting. She deserved it. That was all it took. They cuffed them both, right there, in front of their friends, their family, and the fairy tale wedding they tried so hard to perfect. The fairy tale ended in handcuffs. As Charles and Barbara were led out through the side doors by the officers, stunned silence, filled the grand wedding hall. Guests stood frozen, some with their phones still raised, others whispering in disbelief. The beautiful string quartet had stopped playing. The champagne had lost its sparkle. All eyes turned to Jake and Ashley. Ashley stood in the center of the aisle, her white lace gown shimmering under the crystal chandelier, but her face was pale, almost gray. She looked at me, then at her future in-laws, now cuffed and angry, being escorted through a sea of stunned guests. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wallace, stormed toward her, fury etched on their faces. "This is disgusting," Mr. Wallace growled. "What kind of people treat their own daughter like this? What kind of family expects us to tie our lives to this chaos?" "We gave them a chance," Mrs. Wallace added, her voice sharp with betrayal. "We welcomed them. And look what they've done. Assault. Screaming. Public violence. No class, no decency." Ashley reached out, whispering, "Mom, wait." But Mrs. Wallace stepped back, shaking her head. "This wedding is over." You could hear her words land like thunder. Jake didn't say a word. He looked at me across the room, face hard and unreadable, then slowly turned toward Ashley. His eyes weren't apologetic, they were tired. He looked like a man whose castle had crumbled from the inside, and he had no idea how to hold it together anymore. Ashley covered her mouth, a sharp sob escaping her lips. She turned and ran into the hallway, her veil trailing behind her like a ghost. Her parents followed, and one by one, the guests began to slip away. I stood quietly near the entrance as the room emptied. No one came to offer comfort. No one dared to make eye contact. This wedding, planned for months, financed to perfection, had imploded in less than 30 minutes, all because they couldn't accept a no from the daughter they spent years pretending didn't exist. Jake didn't run after Ashley.
He didn't speak to me.
He just stood there, watching everything unravel silently. The tables were still set, the cake untouched, the music silent. And the fantasy that Charles and Barbara had spent years building?
Gone.
Their need to control everything, even me, had destroyed the one day they claimed to care about the most. 2 days later, I sat in a quiet office with dark wooden bookshelves and a tall window that let in the soft morning light. Across from me sat Mark, the attorney Kevin had recommended. Calm, precise, and smart. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Are you ready to file the charges?" he asked, sliding a pen across the table. I stared at the stack of documents in front of me. Legal complaint forms, witness statements, medical waiver forms, video evidence logs. It was overwhelming, not because I was afraid of them anymore, but because I was finally being heard, and that felt so unfamiliar. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Mark nodded approvingly. "Based on the evidence we have, the video recordings, the public setting, the emotional history, we're filing for misdemeanor assault, attempted coercion of property, and emotional distress damages." He paused, scanning the file again. "This will go on record. It won't be easy, especially since they are parents. Are you sure you want to pursue this?" "I've been sure since the second he hit me," I replied. "But even before that, I've been surviving their emotional abuse for almost 3 decades. This ends now." We submitted the paperwork that day. Over the following weeks, Mark worked like a machine. He contacted guests who had witnessed the assault, Kevin, a few distant cousins, even one of the waitstaff who had caught the incident on video. Multiple people agreed to testify and offered their recordings voluntarily. Their disgust was genuine. I went in for interviews, filed official statements, and attended prep sessions for trial. Meanwhile, Mark filed for compensation of legal fees and emotional damage, citing years of documented neglect and the pressure to surrender my home. The media picked it up briefly. Engineer files assault charge against parents at brother's wedding, and though I hated the attention, I was glad the truth was coming out. For once, the world was seeing what I had endured behind those polished family portraits. When the court date arrived, the gallery was filled with familiar faces, not to support Charles and Barbara, but to support me. Jake didn't show up. Neither did Ashley. Barbara and Charles sat side by side at the defense table, stiff and pale. For once, they couldn't talk over me, couldn't roll their eyes. couldn't shift the blame. In court, I owned my voice, and I used it. When I stood on the witness stand, something inside me settled. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't that quiet girl in the background of family photos. I was Madison, a 28-year-old woman who had been belittled, ignored, and finally assaulted, and I was no longer willing to carry that silently. I told the court everything. How I grew up invisible, how Jake was always favored, how I saved every penny to buy my home, and how my parents tried to rip it from me with a smile. Then I spoke about the slap, not just the physical blow, but the humiliation, the years behind it, and the lifelong message that I didn't matter. Mark, my attorney, presented video footage of the assault. The sound of the slap echoed through the courtroom speakers. Gasps erupted as Barbara's voice screeched through the audio, calling me ungrateful and selfish. Witnesses confirmed it all. Kevin testified without hesitation. She didn't provoke anything, he told the judge. They cornered her. She said no, and he hit her.
We all saw it.
It wasn't the misunderstanding. It was power and rage. The defense tried to claim it was a moment of stress, a family disagreement taken out of context. But no one bought it. The video told the truth. The witnesses told the truth. And for the first time in my life, I was believed. When the jury returned, the courtroom was still. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. The foreperson stood. We, the jury, find the defendants, Charles and Barbara, guilty on all counts. Charles flinched. Barbara's jaw dropped open. She looked at the judge like she couldn't believe what was happening, like the world had suddenly betrayed her. Judge Thompson leaned forward, her tone cold and unwavering. In light of the overwhelming evidence and the emotional trauma inflicted, she said, this court sentences each of you to the following: 12 months probation, 100 hours of community service, mandatory anger management counseling, minimum 12 sessions, $2,500 fine each, and full restitution for the plaintiff's legal fees and emotional distress. The gavel slammed. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. They had spent their lives tearing me down, and now they were finally being held accountable. Not in whispers behind closed doors, but in front of the law, in front of witnesses, and in front of the very society they pretended to impress. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the cool afternoon breeze met my skin like a soft victory banner. I held two things in my hands: the official court paperwork proving I had won, and the keys to my house. My house. Not Jake's. Not my parents'.
Mine.
Mark walked beside me, briefcase in hand, giving a small nod of approval before heading to his car. He didn't need to say anything. He'd done his job, and he'd done it well. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, letting everything soak in. Then I heard someone say my name. I turned and saw Kevin, the wedding guest who had stood up for me when no one else did. He wasn't just a witness. He was a turning point. He handed me a small envelope with a simple note inside. You mattered. You always did. I don't know if he wrote it himself, but I held on to it. I went home that day, not just to a house, but to peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, bracing for the next insult, the next dismissal, the next guilt trip. I walked through my front door, kicked off my shoes, and curled up on the couch with a blanket and a quiet heart. That silence wasn't lonely. It was earned. Barbara and Charles had spent decades teaching me that I was less, that my voice didn't matter, that love had to be earned by obedience. But I had rewritten that story in court, in truth, in the way I defended what I built with my own hands. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly, life began to feel light again. One afternoon, I stood in my garden, clipping dead leaves from my rose bushes when a delivery arrived. It was a small gift box, no sender name, just a note inside. It read, I wasn't brave enough to stand up then, but I admire you now. Ashley. That was closure. Jake never reached out, and honestly, I didn't expect him to. He made his choice when he stood in silence. But I had made mine, to fight, to speak, to protect the woman I had become. So here I am now. Not just standing, thriving. If you've ever felt invisible, unloved, or unimportant, hear this from me. You don't need their approval. You don't need their permission. You just need the courage to believe. You are enough. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own silent battles, I invite you to be part of this growing community. Don't forget to like the video to support powerful voices like Madison's. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters too. And make sure to subscribe for more true, emotional journeys that inspire strength, justice, and healing. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.